She said. I can't have children. The cowboy smiled. Good, I've got enough kids for both. The wind howled through the empty plains as the sun sank behind the distant hills. Dust swirled around his boots as Jake Carson stepped off his horse, brushing the dirt from his hat. He'd seen many sunsets in his life, but that one felt different. Maybe because, for the first time in a long while, someone was waiting for him inside. Her name was Clara, quiet, graceful, and with a sadness in her eyes that no one could quite name. She'd arrived at the Carson ranch 3 months ago, asking for work, said she didn't need charity, just a chance. Jake had given her one. Maybe because he saw something in her. Something familiar. Even in, he said softly as he entered the small wooden house. The smell of stew filled the air. Clara looked up from the stove, her hair tied loosely, a smile flickering on her lips. You're late, she teased gently. Cattle got spooked near the ridge, Jake replied, hanging his hat. Took a while to calm out. She nodded, her eyes lingering on him for a moment longer than usual. There was something unspoken between them, a quiet comfort that had grown slowly, day by day. As they sat for supper, the room filled with the sounds of spoons and crackling fire. The silence wasn't awkward anymore. It felt like peace, until Clara spoke. Jake, she said quietly, her fingers trembling slightly as she set her spoon down. There's something you should know, before this goes any further. He looked up, his rough cowboy face softening. What is it? I can't have children, she said finally, her voice breaking just a little. The doctor told me years ago. I thought you should know before you start expecting something I can't give. For a long moment, Jake said nothing. The fire popped. The wind moaned against the window. Clara lowered her gaze, bracing for disappointment, for the same look she'd seen before, pity, then distance. But Jake only smiled, a slow, quiet smile that made her look up in surprise. Good, he said softly. Her brow furrowed. Good, you mean, he chuckled, leaning back in his chair. I've got enough kids for both of us. She blinked. You, what, 3 of them, he said, a warmth in his voice she hadn't heard before. 2 boys and a girl. Their mama passed 5 winters back. I swore I'd never love again, but, he paused, meeting her eyes. Guess life had other plans. Clara didn't know what to say. She felt tears pressing at her throat, but they weren't from sadness this time. For the first time in years, someone hadn't looked at her as broken. Jake's hand found hers on the table, rough and warm. You've got a kind heart, Clara. That's all those kids need. That's all I need. Outside, thunder rolled low across the sky, as if the heavens themselves had paused to listen. But peace, out here in the wild, never lasted long. Because just as Jake reached to pour her another bowl of stew, the sound of galloping hoofs shattered the quiet. Jake stood instantly, his face turning to stone. Stay here, he muttered, grabbing his rifle. Clara's breath caught. Jake, what is it? He didn't answer, but deep down, he already knew. Trouble had finally found its way back to the Carson ranch. And this time, it wasn't coming for cattle. The next morning came with an uneasy calm. Jake's kids, Sam, Luke, and little Rosie, sat quietly at the table, stealing glances at the stranger now part of their home. Clara smiled at them gently, pouring warm milk into their mugs, trying to hide the tremor in her hands. Jake had ridden out at dawn to check the perimeter after the night's disturbance. He hadn't said much when he left, just pressed his hat to his chest and gave her a look that said, keep them safe. The air was thick with worry. Even the kids sensed something was off. Luke, the oldest at 12, finally spoke. Miss Clara, was that them again last night? She froze. Them. He nodded grimly. The Crawfords. Pa says they've been stealing cattle and claiming land that ain't theirs. They shot Uncle Bill last spring. Clara's heart skipped. Why would they come here? Luke shrugged. 'Cause Pa never backs down. Outside, the sound of hoofbeats made everyone stiffen, but it was only Jake returning, his face pale with dust and something darker. They burned the north fence, he said, voice low. And left a note. What did it say? Clara asked. He pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket and handed it over. 4 words, written in rough charcoal. You can't hide forever. Clara felt her stomach twist. She looked up at Jake, who was staring out the window at the open land. They want the ranch, don't they? She whispered. Jake's jaw tightened. They want more than that. They want a fight. For the next few days, life on the ranch felt different. The laughter faded, replaced by whispers and watchful eyes. Jake spent his days patrolling, his nights at the window, rifle always within reach. And yet, in that storm of fear, something strange began to bloom, a closeness between him and Clara that neither could explain. He'd find her humming softly as she fixed a torn shirt. She'd find him quietly watching her when he thought she wasn't looking. They didn't speak of it, but it was there, like a promise waiting for the right moment. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the horizon fade to gold, Jake finally said, "You ever wonder why life brings people together at the worst times?" Clara smiled faintly. "Maybe that's when we need each other most." He looked at her, really looked, and nodded. "Maybe you're right." But before the quiet could settle again, a sound echoed from the barn, metal clanging, a muffled curse. Jake's eyes went cold. "They're here." He rose, grabbed his rifle, and without another word, stepped into the growing dark. Clara watched him go, heart pounding, a single question echoing in her mind. Would he make it back this time? The night was still, too still, the kind that makes even the crickets go quiet. The moon hung low over the Carson ranch, painting everything in a cold silver light. Clara stood frozen on the porch, her hands clutching the wooden post, watching Jake disappear into the shadows with his rifle. The sound came again. A thud, a whisper, then silence. Clara's heart pounded so hard she could hear it. She turned her head just enough to see the faint glow of the lantern swinging near the barn. Jake's silhouette moved slow, careful, like a wolf stalking through tall grass. "Stay inside," he'd said. But she couldn't. Not this time. Inside, the children were asleep, or pretending to be. Rosie had her tiny hand clutched around Clara's shawl earlier, whispering, "You'll keep him safe, right?" And somehow, Clara had nodded. Now, as the air thickened with danger, she knew one thing. If anything happened to Jake tonight, she'd never forgive herself for standing still. She reached behind the kitchen door, pulled down the revolver Jake kept there, and whispered a silent prayer. Then she stepped off the porch. Out near the barn, Jake was moving quietly, his eyes scanning the darkness. He could sense them before he saw them. The faint scrape of boots, the low murmur of men who thought they were hunters. "Crawford," he called out, his voice steady. "You picked the wrong night." A chuckle floated back through the night air. "Ain't no wrong night to finish old business, Carson." 3 shadows emerged from behind the barn. The leader, Jack Crawford, had that same twisted grin Jake remembered from years ago, the kind of man who enjoyed cruelty just to feel alive. "You've got something that don't belong to you," Jack said, stepping forward. "That land was promised to my daddy before yours stole it." Jake didn't flinch. "Your daddy lost it fair. Cards don't lie, Jack." Jack spat in the dirt. "Cards ain't law, guns are." Before Jake could reply, the barn door creaked, and both men turned. Clara stood there, holding the revolver with both trembling hands, the lantern light flickering across her face. "Put that down," Jake hissed. But she didn't. "If you're gonna talk about stealing, then let's start with the truth," she said, her voice shaking but loud enough to echo. "Because you're not here for land. You're here for me." Jake froze. "Clara, what are you talking about?" Jack laughed, slow and mocking. "Guess she didn't tell you, did she, cowboy? She used to run with us." Jake's heart slammed against his ribs. "That's a lie, is it?" Jack tilted his head. "She and my brother robbed stagecoaches from Tucson to El Paso. She's got more outlaw in her than half my men." Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. "It's true," she said. "I was young, stupid, and scared. But I left that life behind years ago. I didn't know they'd still come for me." Jake's grip tightened on his rifle, torn between rage and disbelief. "You should have told me. I was going to," she said softly. "But I wanted you to see me for who I am now, not what I was." Jack smirked. "Touchin', ain't it? Shame it's about to end." He raised his gun. Jake didn't think. He dove forward, pushing Clara aside as the shot cracked through the night. The bullet tore through his shoulder, spinning him to the ground. Clara screamed, dropping to her knees beside him. Jake groaned, clutching his arm. "Stay down," he whispered, but she was already lifting the revolver again. Her tears blurred the world as she fired once, the shot catching Jack's hat, sending it flying. The Crawfords ducked for cover, returning fire. Sparks flew as bullets struck the barn door. Then another sound cut through the chaos, the high, trembling cry of a child. "Rosie!" Clara's blood ran cold. The kids had woken up. "Jake!" she cried. "The children!" He tried to stand, but his leg buckled. "Get them! Go!" Clara hesitated, torn between the man bleeding before her and the children screaming behind the house. Another shot whistled past her ear, and she made her choice. She ran. Inside, she found Luke holding Rosie behind the kitchen table, his little brother clutching a knife far too big for his hands. Clara knelt beside them, breathing hard. "It's okay. You'll be okay," she lied, even though her heart was breaking. Outside, the gunfire stopped. Then, silence. "Jake," she whispered into the stillness. A single voice answered, cold and close. "You can stop hitting, Clara. It's over." Jack Crawford stepped into the doorway, his gun aimed square at her chest. She pushed the children behind her, raising the revolver again. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely aim. "Please," she said, "you don't have to do this." Jack sneered. "You think a sweet face and a sob story make up for the money you cost us? I'm not that woman anymore. Then I guess she'll die with you." He cocked the hammer, and before Clara could even blink, a shot rang out. But it wasn't hers. Jack stumbled backward, a look of shock twisting his face. The gun fell from his hand as he collapsed. Behind him stood Jake, pale and bleeding, the smoking rifle still steady in his good arm. He winced, lowering it slowly. "Told you I'd handle it," he muttered. Clara rushed to him, catching him as his knees gave way. "Jake! Oh God, you're bleeding." He smiled weakly. "Nothin' I ain't felt before." The kids were crying now, clinging to Clara's skirt. The storm outside broke at last, rain crashing against the roof, washing away the dust and blood. By dawn, the Crawfords were gone. One dead, the others vanished into the wilderness. The sheriff came later, taking statements, shaking his head at the mess. Jake sat on the porch, his arm in a sling, watching the sunrise through the haze of pain. Clara sat beside him, silent. After a long time, he said, "You should have told me the truth. I was afraid you'd send me away." He looked at her, eyes tired but kind. "You really think I'd let go of the woman who stood her ground with a gun in her hand and 3 kids behind her?" She tried to smile through her tears. "You should rest." He shook his head. "No, I want you to know something first." He leaned closer. "You said you can't have children. But those kids, they already love you like their own. Maybe that's all that matters." Her breath caught. "You still want me here?" Jake smiled faintly. "I told you before, Clara, I've got enough kids for both of us." She laughed softly through the tears, resting her head against his shoulder. For the first time in years, she felt safe. But far off in the distance, beyond the hills, a single rider watched the ranch through the morning haze, the youngest Crawford brother, eyes burning with vengeance. He turned his horse and rode away. And though the sun rose golden and warm over the Carson ranch, Clara felt the chill of something unfinished settle deep inside her chest. The past, it seemed, wasn't quite done with them yet. The morning sun spilled gold over the Carson ranch, soft and gentle, as if trying to heal the scars of the night before. But peace in the Wild West was always borrowed, never owned. Jake knew that better than anyone. He stood at the porch rail, shoulder bandaged, watching Clara feed the horses with Rosie skipping beside her. For a moment, it almost looked like a dream, a life he never thought he'd have again. But dreams fade fast when danger remembers your name. 3 days passed. The Crawfords hadn't been seen since that bloody night, and folks in town whispered that they'd scattered south toward the border. Jake wanted to believe it. Clara tried to, yet both of them felt that uneasy silence that meant trouble was only catching its breath. That evening, as the sun dropped low and painted the land red, Luke came running from the ridge, out of breath. "Ha, there's smoke. Near the creek bed." Jake's heart sank. "How far?" "Close," the boy panted. "Real close." Jake grabbed his hat, his jaw set. "Get everyone inside. Bolt the doors. Don't open for anyone but me." Clara reached for his arm. Jake, please, you're hurt. Let the sheriff handle it. He shook his head. By the time the sheriff rides out here, we'll be dust. They finish what they start, Clara. Always have. She looked into his eyes, saw the same stubborn fire that had both scared and saved her that first night. Then I'm going with you. No, I'm not asking, she said, her voice firm. This is my fight too. Jake hesitated. For a second, he saw the scared woman who arrived months ago, broken and quiet. But that woman was gone. The one standing before him was fierce, forged by loss, love, and the wild. He nodded slowly. All right, but stay behind me. They saddled the horses in silence, the wind whispering through the tall grass. When they reached the creek bed, the smell of smoke filled the air. The fence was burning, and beyond it, 2 horses were tied, their riders waiting. The youngest Crawford stepped forward, gun in hand, hate carved into his face. You killed my brother. Jake's voice was steady. Your brother brought it on himself. He was blood. The man shouted. You think I'll let that go? Clara stepped forward. You think killing more people will bring him back? He glared at her. You don't talk. You're the reason this started. Jake's hand moved toward his holster, but the man raised his gun first. Don't, he hissed. Drop it, cowboy, or she dies. Clara froze as he aimed the barrel right at her chest. For a second, time seemed to stop. The wind, the horses, even the smoke. Jake's breath came slow. You don't want to do this, son. The man laughed bitterly. Don't tell me what I want. You took my kin. I'll take yours. Then, a sound behind him. A twig snapped. Luke stepped out from the brush, his small hands clutching Jake's old rifle, shaking like a leaf. His voice cracked when he shouted, "Leave them alone." Everything happened in a blur. The Crawford boy spun around, firing his gun. Luke flinched, and before Jake could even think, Clara ran. She threw herself in front of the boy just as the shot rang out. The bullet tore through her shoulder, spinning her to the ground. Clara, Jake roared, firing back. His shot hit true, knocking the outlaw's gun clean from his hand. The Crawford stumbled, stared at the wound in disbelief, then fell to his knees. The fight went out of him like wind leaving a sail. Jake rushed to Clara, gathering her into his arms. Her dress was soaked in blood, her skin pale, but she was still breathing, barely. "Why'd you do that?" he whispered, his voice breaking. She smiled faintly through the pain. "Because he's your boy, and you're my home." He pressed his forehead against hers. "Don't you leave me now. Not after everything." Her eyes fluttered, tears mixing with dust. "I'm not going anywhere, cowboy." Luke dropped beside them, sobbing. Jake wrapped his free arm around him, holding them both as the sun sank behind the hills. The world felt still again, broken, but alive. The sheriff came an hour later. The Crawfords were done for good. The land, once soaked in vengeance, was quiet again. Days passed, then weeks. Clara healed slowly. The wound left a scar, but Jake said it looked like a badge, proof of courage. She'd laugh, tell him not to flatter her, but deep down, she liked when he did. One evening, months later, the ranch was full of laughter. Rosie was teaching Clara how to braid her doll's hair. Luke and Sam were chasing chickens out by the barn, and Jake was fixing the porch rail with his usual gruff patience. Clara walked up behind him, wiping her hands on her apron. "You ever think we'd get here?" she asked. He smiled without looking up. "Didn't think I'd get anywhere after Mary passed. But life's funny like that." She sat beside him, eyes soft. "You really mean what you said that night? About having enough kids for both of us?" He looked at her then, full of quiet affection. "Yeah, but turns out, there's room for one more heart in this family." She blinked, tears welling. "You're something else, Jake Carson." He reached over, brushing a stray hair from her face. "So are you, Clara Carson." The name hung in the air, warm, right. Out on the horizon, the sky turned gold and crimson. The land stretched wide and wild, but for once, it didn't feel lonely. The Carson Ranch, once a place of grief and ghosts, was alive again, filled with the sound of laughter, the smell of supper, and the quiet promise of a new beginning. Clara had come to the West looking for work, maybe peace. She found something better. A family, a home, and a man who saw her not for what she couldn't give, but for everything she already was. And when the night wind whispered across the plains, it carried her voice, steady, proud, and full of life. "I can't have children," she'd once said. But now, as she watched those 3 kids chase fireflies in the dark, she smiled and whispered back, "Turns out, I didn't have to." Thank you so much for watching this story till the very end. Your support means more than words can ever say. If you felt the depth of this journey, don't forget to give it a like, share it with someone who needs it, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel. Together, we'll keep bringing powerful stories to life, and your presence here makes all the difference.